and welcome to Magic and Skepticism with Matt Dillahunty.
I'm working on it. Although you can't hear me, you don't know that I'm working on it. Highly skeptical!
Bet you can hear me now. After I turn the microphone on. How you guys doing? This is there's microphones set up, and anybody who's got a question, just come up at any minute. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk, and we don't want that. And I'll get to questions. There'll be plenty of talking in between questions. I want to thank you guys for like the third time or the umpty-jillionth time. I love coming up to Vancouver. I've been here a handful of times thanks to Pangburn Philosophy. So a round of applause for Pangburn for doing this. When they originally came to me, with the idea, I want to tell you how this came about. I came up and I did an event with Richard Dawkins, and I reached out to a friend of mine in the magic community who recently become a friend, and I said, hey, I don't want to push, but I'm doing this event. If you'd like to come, you can come. And he's been incredibly helpful to me ever since then, and he's here tonight too. But he has kind of a mild glare, so I'm not going to necessarily call him out. But he also helped because at the last minute we didn't have a headset microphone, and then the one he gave me had a short in it, and then we got another one after that, and we sorted stuff out. So since I can't see him well enough to know if I want to call him out, just give a round of applause to Sean Farquhar, the two-time world champion of magic. For his assistance. As I said, I had done versions of this because I've done mostly close-up magic, all my life, cards and coins and rubber bands and, mystical powers from another dimension. And but I wanted to do more to kind of see if there was a way to teach the basics of skepticism, just a few key ideas, and have it be fun. And so we started in Victoria the other day. We're here tonight, obviously. And then I head on to Calgary on Friday, and I do a couple other stops. But we end up in Halifax, and then there's one weird event in this whole series, and that is in Toronto. Instead of doing the Magic and Skepticism lecture, I'm going to be sitting down with Jordan Peterson in sort of a head-to-head format where I hope to talk to him about God and morals and truth and pronouns, because that's evidently what he's best known for. But, yeah, there's somebody over here with a question.
Hello, I'm Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Last time you were in town with Harris and Dawkins, you said at one point in that, as a sort of an aside to the audience, that you had a nail in the coffin for Harris's case against free will. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what that nail was and how that conversation went after the show that night.
We actually did that conversation in, I think it was Chicago. It was me, Sam, and Lawrence Krauss. And the key thing was, he wrote his book on free will, and I agree with all of it. I'm not sure how many people are up on this, so let me keep this as neat as I can. Sam's argument is basically that from a scientific perspective, we can't possibly have free will. The deterministic aspect of it doesn't really matter, so this is why he's in constant battle with Dan Dennett. Because Dennett's a compatibilist, as am I largely, and that's just the view that determinism and free will can be compatible. Essentially, there's some sort of will that is free enough. Not that you could do anything. We all agree that the libertarian notion of free will, that if you rewound the clock, you could have done otherwise, isn't true.
Okay.
And right now, people are like, wow, I came to a Magic and Skepticism thing. What the hell is this guy talking about? The short version is we had a conversation in Chicago, and interestingly, there's a guy who does a video series, Rationality Rules, who challenged me on what I had said about it, and he got some things very right, so I went on his show, and we had a conversation. And basically, the agreement that we came to is that we all agree that we have will. We don't agree on whether or not it's justified in calling it free. I think I'm okay with calling it free, provided I add the caveats that I'm not suggesting that if you rewound the clock, you could have done otherwise. And the example that I thought was the nail, which was your question, now that we're 10 minutes into my answer, is Sam could get up and jump off the stage, or I could throw Sam off the stage. At the end of the day, I'm up here, he's down there. The difference between those two actions is, in my mind, everything we care about with respect to free will. Because he had some desire, I had some desire, I imposed over his, and this also gets you to moral responsibility and all the things people care about with free will. So.
Okay, cool.
Good enough?
Follow up on those conversations.
Sure. Yes, sir. I didn't even know there was somebody with a question you were hiding.
Well, I didn't want to block the people. Anyway, welcome Vancouver again. I think it's
Thank you.
The third or fourth time I've seen you, and in terms of that. So anyway, as you're aware, Canada and the United States have a very special relationship. We have this undefended border. We have a big trade relationship. Can you give us some good news about your country in terms of, even if you got to make it up, because we're losing sleep here, and anyway, so
Why do you think I planned a Canada tour?
anyway, I guess we're especially concerned about implications for humanists and secularism and so forth. So anyway, we appreciate your comments.
I don't know how much good news I can give you other than we've survived the first year. Kind of. It was bad. Okay, obviously I'm a big liberal progressive, and there's no way in hell I was going to vote for Trump or support anybody who voted for Trump. And I probably got a little riled up on Facebook, as I wont to do, and ended up blocking some people because rawr, politics. The thing is it wasn't so much about left wing, right wing for me. I can come down on different sides on different issues, and so there are occasions where I could find Republicans, Green parties, Libertarians, whatever, that I could essentially vote for, or at least not be miserable if they got in office. My concern with Trump was, from my perspective, the United States elected the least qualified, least intelligent, least presidential, least respectful, least responsible individual that was running. And that's saying something, considering there were 17 Republicans in the field at one point, and one of them thinks that the pyramids of Egypt were for grain storage. We have a Secretary of the Interior who didn't even know what that was. You mean I'm in charge of the nukes? How'd that happen? Who's a former governor of Texas. I will say that I'm not despondent. The checks and balances that are in place they're running amok right now. There's not enough checks, but the ones that are supposed to be there, I'm at least optimistic that we're not necessarily doomed. But I'm not filled with optimism on the political front. Where I am incredibly optimistic, I'm not optimistic on climate change or any of these other things. I think we're dropping the ball across the board. But when it comes to secular humanism, when it comes to standing up in opposition to religious favoritism and dogma and things like that, I think we're doing a pretty good job, as long as we just don't kill ourselves before we get to a better place. The nuns, the N-O-N-E nuns, not N-U-N, one of the most rapidly growing religious identities. But we got problems across the board. I think one of the bigger issues that I deal with is hyperbole. I gave a talk once, hyperbole will destroy the world. And I don't think that was hyperbole at all. We get bogged down in what our pet issue is, and we make mistakes because we're not properly skeptical. We assume that not only do we want everything and we want it now and we want it free and we want it better, but when we see someone, we tend to think they're just like me, until they demonstrate that they're not like you in some tiny way, and then we assume, they're nothing like me. And so, without getting off into various drama. What happened recently with me, in fact, was BuzzFeed did an article on Lawrence Krauss, accusing him of sexual assault, harassment, all kinds of things. And I had just shared the stage with him a few times. And so the allegations dropped. I grabbed my bags. I headed to the airport because we were on our way to do a show in Phoenix. And when I landed in Phoenix, I looked at social media, and already there were people saying, "Oh, Matt and Sam Harris have gone dark on social media. They're surrounding the horses to protect their friend, and they're going to, they're never going to do the right thing." And they had already just made a bunch of assumptions. And before I could even respond further, it's like, you look, they're protecting their boy, and the accusations will be out about Matt next week because he's obviously been, grabby and everything else. I understand the frustration that people have dealt with. And when I talked about it, Sam and I talked about it on stage, the hashtag #MeToo and the Whisper Network, that led to some of this. I'm supportive of those things because we've constructed a society where, in many cases, women or victims, depending on how or what the situation is, are afraid to speak. And so it's probably best that they're able to share that information with each other. And yes, there's going to be some collateral damage. But I was in this position where I didn't necessarily know what had happened. I'm not an investigator. I had heard rumors. And I was trying to figure out and wait to see how Lawrence responded to it and then how I was going to respond to it. And boy, that didn't suit anybody. I was not giving the answer they wanted as quickly as they wanted. And so now I become the villain. I use that as an example. I'm not complaining, and hey, my life's great. I'm thrilled to be here and everything else. I use it as an example because it's happening not just with relation to that issue, but also with politics and other things where we assume that you've read everything I've read and you're as familiar with the aspects of the situation that I'm familiar with as I am. We project that onto other people. And the social media aspect of this is creating bubbles to where you're constantly being fed the stuff that you've already seen and the stuff that you agree with, and you've got your little group and everything else. And this is actually far more divisive. You would think that social media would be about bringing us together, but in many cases it ends up being far more divisive. And when it comes down on political lines, the best example I can use for why I'm still optimistic is that I can have conversations with people who vehemently disagreed with me on any number of things, including politics. And I went to a friend of mine who voted for Trump, and it floored me. What? No, that's not what I wouldn't have thought you were like that. What happened? I was baffled. And what had happened was he had been fed a bunch of information that the liberal side was basically saying, if you vote for Trump, you're a racist. And his response was, I'm not a racist, screw that, I'm voting for Trump. And I was like, okay, well, that's a shitty process for you to lead to that and not see the broader implications of this. But the truth is that with that one loaded word of racism, there's people on one side who only see it one way. The people who think racism is only you hate people in a certain group and are actively trying to oppress them. This is you're only racist if you're in the KKK and burning crosses mentality. There's people on the other side who, when they talk about racism, they're talking not necessarily even about explicit racism, but implicit racism, the things that find their way in society, the fact that we're all a little bit xenophobic. And that makes us wary of people who aren't like us. And we need to recognize this and when it's happening so that we can do something to make a better world. And yet they're both using the same word. And so it gets more complicated than that, but this wasn't supposed to be a lecture on racism and language. But that frustration caused some people to react in a horrible way and swing further one way than the other. So yeah, I'm not incredibly optimistic, but I do see the conversations happening, and I'm optimistic that if we keep having the conversations, we can make some progress and find out, hey, what went wrong on all sides, even if one side went way more wrong than the other. Because I don't want to pull a Trump and say, oh, there were good people on both sides. No, there weren't. Not in every situation. Yes, sir. I will give shorter answers, but...
Hi, my name is Louis. watched your show since episode 3, I guess, if it's experience.
I wasn't even on episode 3.
Well, that's when I started watching the show.
Okay. As if, why would you watch an episode I wasn't on?
That's just when I started watching it. My question starts back to skepticism.
Yeah.
You had said something earlier with the box. Something about...
Can you demonstrate?
Opposite of skepticism? Like
Yeah.
you say, it's mumbo jumbo.
Cynicism.
No. When you had said the box.
Yeah, that was an example of cynicism.
Yeah, you had said, but you can just say simply it's mumbo jumbo and you're equally wrong as to believing it.
Yeah.
It's magic or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, I want to know at what point where you have a pile of evidence to show that this is wrong, it's never been shown to be correct, where you have a pile big enough to say that's mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, so those are two different things. If you had a pile of evidence to show that it's actually not supernatural.
No, I mean from like past experiences. At what point can you discard it? Where, as a skeptic, you can say, I'm not going to have to prove it right, or I'm not going to have to do the work. I'm dismissing you because too many times this has happened wrong.
Sure.
At what point where I'm justified to say no?
When you've shown what the actual explanation is, when you've demonstrated that the explanation is not that it's supernatural. That's correct. In many cases, it can never be done. There's this notion of whether or not a claim is falsifiable. Is there some way to show that it's false? If it's an unfalsifiable claim, then you can never say, oh, it's not supernatural. The best thing to do is to say, we have no good reason to believe that it's supernatural. Nobody's ever demonstrated it is, and we don't see any path that anybody could demonstrate. This is when I was talking about the box and supernatural causation. I'll give a slightly different example, a prediction. Because in religions, for example, you hear a lot of prophecies. And hey, here's a prophecy and it came true. Well, I predicted that somebody would pick Johnny Cash. Now, how did I do that? Well, maybe I have a time machine. Maybe ghosts told me. Maybe a god told me. Maybe I engaged in some sort of trickery. Maybe I got lucky. Maybe I engaged in some sort of trickery. The key thing is, we have a phenomenon, and we want an explanation for it. But the fact that we don't have an explanation does not mean we get to conclude that X isn't the explanation until you know how it's done. But the key thing to your question is, how many times do we have to keep retesting this stuff? Oh my gosh, the Psychic Friends Network, and did I mention the Bigfoot thing tonight? No, sorry. I skipped a lot of stuff. It strikes me as funny that when the Discovery Channel and the History Channel, which is not really about discovery or history anymore, they say, have we discovered Bigfoot? Tune in April 20th at 8 p.m. and you'll find out. Now, first of all, I don't know how they get an audience for that, because you would think anybody with any sense would go, if we had discovered Bigfoot, I don't think I'd have to wait till April 20th at 8 p.m. I think it would have been in the New York Times, and these people would be up for a Nobel Prize or whatever.
Because it's on April 20th.
That's right. Hey, well played. I'm in BC. What did I expect? So the thing is, you don't have to continue testing it. And this is part of what the James Randi Educational Foundation did. They had a $1 million prize, but they kind of stopped it. And one of the things they changed was you need to make some demonstration somewhere, witnessed by somebody, reported in a newspaper, that you can do some paranormal thing before we'll even bother testing, because we don't have time to test everybody, and we have a limited amount of resources. So you try to put your resources towards testing those things that are plausible. And if something has been tested and failed over and over and over and over again, we cannot reasonably say this is not true or this is not supernatural. All we can say is this has never been demonstrated to be true. This is never, the dowsing guy, he's convinced that he's pretty accurate, which is why I recommended that he put it to test to find out how accurate he is. Because either he can get $1 million or he should stop dowsing. But even if he fails, that doesn't mean dowsing doesn't work. It just means nobody's been able to demonstrate that it has. So we put the burden of proof on the person making a claim. And this is why I'm cautioning so repeatedly. Because if you say dowsing is bullshit, you've now made a claim. And how are you going to prove that? If it's an unfalsifiable claim, you've now adopted a burden of proof you can't meet. So the smarter thing to do is to instead of just saying, I'm not convinced that it's real, nobody's been able to demonstrate it, please show me evidence and I will become convinced, etc. The cynicism that I'm warning against is, we've tested it so many times, it must be garbage, and so we throw it away. You may be correct, but you can't actually demonstrate what you're saying. Is it clear enough? Clear enough. As soupy mud. Yes, sir?
On your show, sorry, who's the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Who's the favorite person you've had on as like a guest host, like Aaron Raw or anything like that? And who would you like to have on if you could have Lawrence Crouch or Sam Harris or Thunderfoot?
That was good. Just throw Phil in there like there's no history.
I didn't know there was. Yeah. I like Phil.
He's an ass who lied about me in public, so I don't have anything to do with him. Yeah, so my favorite person on the show of all time is Tracy. More than me, more than any guest, Tracy Harris. Which is why last time did anybody come see us when we was here with Tracy and Sarah Hader? Yeah. Yeah, I make no bones about it. The way her brain works is just, it floors me. As far as guests, I really wish I'd have been on when David Fitzgerald was on, but I was touring, because David and I really need to talk a little bit more about mythicism. We're going to do a couple videos since we didn't get to do the show together. I can't necessarily remember a favorite guest or even a favorite caller. I tend to...
G-Man.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, G-Man is a YouTuber. That's enough. For people who aren't familiar with the show, you're probably going to get a couple inside references tonight. Don't worry about it. You don't need to know. Ray Comfort called the show, by the way. I used that clip from him from his banana video. But he's actually called the show and we had a conversation. And he said something that was incredibly revealing, which is probably one of my favorite moments in the show. Because for those who are aware, one of my go-to arguments about why I don't particularly find the Bible to be a good moral book of instruction is what? Yes, my peeps are here. Slavery. The Bible explicitly endorses slavery. It tells you who to enslave, how to enslave them, how to treat them. You can beat them as long as they don't die within a couple of days, and all this stuff. And so I figured I would ask Ray about this. And Ray's answer was, well, I don't believe everything in the Bible is true. Now that floored me coming from him, because he's the type of person that I would have expected. And that's the sort of thing that you need to watch out for. Because if you're not willing, like if you're on a call-in show, you need to listen to what that person's saying, and you need to not make assumptions. Hey, what God are we talking about? What book are we talking about? How seriously do you take this? What do you think is right or wrong? You've got to ask more questions. And I have screwed up many, many times in the last 13 plus years of doing the show, where I made assumptions about, because people ask me how I avoid getting bored doing the show. First of all, I don't know how I would get bored. I actually genuinely love it. I love doing it. I love the conversations. But there are things that I do, I kind of make a game out of some stuff in my head. And one thing is, I want to see how quickly after they start talking do I know what they're going to say. But I also, while I'm doing that, consciously avoid letting me direct everything towards my assumption. It's just a side game. I bet he's going to say this. And sometimes you'll see me go, and that's when I got it right. And other times it'll be, okay, I was wrong about where this is going. And those are the ones that are more interesting for me. So yes, Tracy, Fitz. Next.
100% agree with the Tracy thing.
Yeah.
Less Martin Wagner would help the show a little bit, but that's just me.
Martin hasn't been on the show in years.
Oh, really? Maybe I just remember him being... Anyway, that's not why. My question is, what's new for the atheist experience? You've had two people sitting behind a desk for 13 years. I'm just wondering if you're going to broaden it out maybe include the audience, do different things, have guests that juggle? I don't know. Just is there something in the works to brighten up the show, make it different, refresh it?
So I'd argue that the show is more rapidly becoming different than it has in quite a while. We went from having one host, me, who was there 50 weeks a year, to two hosts, me and Russell, to three, me, Russell, and Tracy. And then we're having more guests on. We're having, well, at one point, people said, the cast on the show needs to be more diverse. Cool. I'm not just going to go out and pick somebody to come in and be a token representative of a group just to make somebody happy that we're diverse.
Phil is great.
Yeah, Phil is awesome. And the best volunteer on the planet. He does everything. He builds ramps, he feeds the homeless, he probably darns socks in his spare time. It's amazing, the stuff that he does. So what we try to do is make sure that we're branching out, but we can't just, somebody's got to show up, be involved with the group a little while so that people are comfortable with them before we're going to put them on the air. But the Atheist Community of Austin did start a second show, or actually I guess a third show, actually I guess a fourth show, because we had Atheist Experience, nonprofits, godless bitches, and now there's Talk Heathen. And Eric and Jamie have started doing this. I went on to guest with them a couple times, but I don't plan to be on very often because this stuff needs to go on without me. And it's not my show. None of them are my show. Not even my organization. I didn't start anything. I just showed up and kind of took over for a period of time. And I'll do it as long as I can, but I'm also happy to see it change and see new people come in. And we're doing some of that, and we also, for the longest time, we had no information about how many people were watching the show because it was on public access and they don't track those things. And we also didn't have a good way of getting feedback from the audience on what they wanted. But the ACA hired a media consultant who did some surveys, got information from people about what they wanted to see, who they wanted to see more of, who they wanted to see less of, what types of things they wanted us to talk about. The audience is now in our building on the other side of a pane of glass, and there's usually 20 or 30 people there. We do now have a mic, and the plan was to try to maybe end each show with a question from the audience. We've done it a couple of times, but the truth is, man, once the phone calls get rolling, that 90 minutes just flies, and the next thing you know, it's like we're done. So I think instead of focusing, I mean, they're changing the Atheist Experience a little bit, but what the ACA is really doing is they've added Talk Heathen. They're producing more media, and there's different people on those shows. That's it? Oh, wait, somebody's coming up.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, do you want to go first?
No, I just.
Is it me?
Oh, wow. All of a sudden, there's multiple people at microphones. I will go faster. So go right ahead.
I'm a big fan of the show. Huge fan of the boots and jacket, by the way. Looks
Thank
really
you.
good. Another question about the show, actually. If I mentioned a Mark from Austin Stone Church,
Yes,
you know who I'm talking about?
I know exactly. Well, yes, I know who you're talking about.
So you can respond to this or not if you want. But
No, it wasn't the Austin Bomber.
I was just wondering. I watched a few YouTube clips on it. It seemed like you're making good progress with them. Just wondering how that ended up.
Oh, I hate to burst your bubble.
Yeah, that thing. It's
He was a
second part to
prank.
that
He was a
question.
prank caller.
Really?
From somewhere in Europe. Russell actually tracked them down and had a conversation with him. So there's a guy who kept calling, and I'll let you finish up here in just a second, who said his name was Mark, and he said he was from Austin Stone Church. And when he first started calling in, it was, the church was mad at us because people in the youth group were watching the Atheist Experience show, and the church was very unhappy with us. So, being a skeptic, I got a hold of the Austin Stone Church, because if they were mad at us for something, I was at least going to address it. And I had a series of lunches with one of the associate pastors of the church who assured us that there was no problem, and that while some of them were passingly familiar with the show, there was, not like kids in the youth group were sitting around watching the Atheist Experience. They should have been. But, so that was the first hint that Mark was a phony, and Russell tracked them down. And it was a couple of the same type of guys who were prank calling under different names and altering their voice. And some of our viewers would recognize it. I'm evidently not as good as identifying a voice in the heat of a moment. The sad part of the story is that the associate pastor that I went to lunch with, we went to lunch once or twice, but we had a couple conversations outside, and he left Austin to go on his mission trip for his church. I don't remember exactly where he went, but he was killed by an IED, and I spent most of a day trying to get a hold of the main pastor at the church because I couldn't figure out whether or not I should go to his funeral or avoid it like the plague, because I'd never met he left behind a wife and a newborn, and in the end I decided to not go. I mean, it's not like we were good friends, but I did send a note, saying that I was very sorry to hear that he had died, because I'd been looking forward to him coming back to have more conversations. So yeah, even the prank calls lead to something good on occasion, because there was a new connection there that prompted some good conversations. And when I saw the newspaper report that he was dead, that's probably one of the deaths that hit me the hardest in the last few years, and it's somebody I barely knew for a short period of time. So
that's shocking and not at all where I was expecting it to go.
Yeah, me neither.
The second part to that question was, I kind of felt like in that conversation, turns out it's a fraud, but sometimes it's a little hard to tell when you should just cut your losses with certain people.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean,
Sure.
You've said before that everyone deserves that shot. You should never give up on somebody, but when is enough enough?
Yeah, I can elaborate. I have no idea. I try on occasion. I may go on with somebody even if I think it's futile for a long time. And other times I just don't have the patience, and so I'm done. I don't have as many one-on-one conversations. I mean, the conversations take place on the show, people are watching. The debates take place in front of an audience, and I'm never trying to necessarily change my opponent's mind. I'm just trying to present the things that I think should. You have to decide for yourself how far you want to go. And you can always say, let's stick a pin in this conversation, or that's an interesting point, let me think about that and get back to you. And then do it. Think about it and get back to them, because you should do what you say you're going to do. Oh, they're walking behind me. I'm afraid they're going to do something mean to me. So there's no easy answer. But if you're at the point in a conversation where if you continue, you actually are pretty strongly convinced that you're going to make things worse, like you're now irritated, you're frustrated, just stop. And also, if people are pestering you, oh, you're an atheist, why? Or you're this, why? You don't owe anybody any sort of explanation for who you are and what you think. You are not required to engage in a conversation. So if you're not comfortable with it, just, hey, I don't really want to talk about it. I want to have that conversation. And if they can't accept that as an answer, then they weren't worth talking to probably in the first place. But, yes?
Hi, I'm an atheist. I work in a private Catholic high school. I was wondering, what advice would you have for teenage boys and girls who are running into an impasse between their natural sexuality and their faith?
So it's kind of the same advice that I give for kids who are finding their way out of religion. It's a different kind of coming out. For the religion thing, I've always just said, don't make a big deal out of it. I need to sit you down and tell you something. And just gradually, be who you are. And eventually the questions are going to come, and then you can have the conversation in a much more organic sense. I am no expert on coming out as gay, queer, trans, whatever. But I think some of that applies. But number one is you have to take care of yourself. If you think that being who you are is going to put your health, livelihood, happiness at great risk, there is absolutely no shame in not saying anything to anybody. You don't owe them an explanation for this. If you are, I'm always reluctant to give advice to minor kids, just for fear that somebody will sue, but this I'll do without reservation. If you are a minor and you are under the roof and financial dependence upon a family, you don't have to tell them anything either. You can wait until you're out on your own. You need to find the path that makes you the most comfortable with who you are, and nobody else can tell you who that is. And nobody else can tell you how to do that. During the time when people were publicly outing closeted homosexuals because they thought, oh, if we just out this celebrity and this celebrity and this celebrity, it'll make it easier for the rest of us. And that may be true, but that's not your story to tell. And so we need to make sure that we are providing people with resources to how they can get safe counseling, people they can interact with that are not going to judge them. There's the secular counseling, seculartherapist.org, I think, which allows people to find counselors that aren't going to, engage with you on a religious front, which may or may not apply. I mean, you could be religious and gay, religious and trans, and I know that all those things are difficult. But you got to take care of yourself first. You don't owe anybody anything. And there are resources and people that we should just blast all over everywhere so that nobody has to feel like they're hiding and alone. That even if they have to sneak off to be in this secret group with folks to provide that interaction that almost all of us seem to need, then we have to do that. And then until the rest of us manage to change the world around them so that it's safer for people to come out and be who they are. That's our job. Their job is to work towards being the best them that they can be, and to not feel. It's incredibly difficult, especially if your religion is telling you that who you are is somehow wrong or broken or offensive to a deity or to the people around you. The counter to bad ideas is better ideas. And so every single time there's an aspect of the community, I don't care if you have beliefs that are different than mine on a number of things. You can believe there's a God, you can be convinced of this thing, but if you're using that to say that somebody else is now wrong or bad or evil or awful or should be ashamed of who they functionally are, you are terrible, and what you think your God is advocating is terrible, and I wouldn't want anything to do with them even if you were real. We have to build communities and be as encouraging as we can. Those of us who can be out as atheists, as gay, as trans, as anything, need to be out and work to make the world safe for those who aren't as safe coming out. I told you they were going to do something. Throw a brick at me. You get the honor of the last question, and then when we're done, I'll hang out up there by the merch stuff and say hi.
Okay. So I just have a question. You mentioned that you were having an event soon with Jordan Peterson.
Yes.
What do you foresee, or what do you currently think that you agree most on and disagree most on?
I think we agree most on that the government shouldn't be able to dictate what language you use. Mm-hmm. We definitely disagree on whether or not that's what was actually happening, because it wasn't. I'm not even a Canadian, and I know that's not what was happening. What we disagree most on, it's funny because I have no idea. It's so difficult to get an answer out of him that is clear. I mean, on psychology stuff, you can get, he speaks clearly. So the first time he's on Sam Harris's podcast, there's this lengthy discussion about what is truth. And there are people who've referred to him as the Deepak Chopra of Christianity. And I'm not saying that to be insulting, because he's clearly a bright guy. And I know that there are things that we're going to agree on. But he said things like, I don't think that reality is made up of matter. I think it's made up of what matters. He has a notion of truth that is not in any way tied to reality. He has what he calls metaphoric truth. And it's not quite this is true for me. It's worse than that. It's true if it benefits you. And Sam had previously tried to point out, I thought rather brilliantly, that if your wife's cheating on you, that would not benefit you. But it's still true. in reality. So I think what we're going to have to do is whenever we say anything's true or real, we're going to have to say either metaphorically true or really fucking true. Because I don't care about metaphorical truth. I don't care. You can be as poetic as you want. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the idea of a soul from a poetic standpoint. The human soul, the human nature, those things. I don't speak in those terms because I don't get a lot of value out of it. But I realize that you can inspire people with poetry, with art. This is part of what Pangburn Philosophy is about. Let art and science inspire. I find the answers incredibly frustrating. He was asked if he was a Christian. It took him several minutes to get to anything remotely approaching an answer. I was a Christian for 25 years. Anybody walks up to me and says, "Are you a Christian?" "Yes." "Would you like to know more?" If they come up to me now and they say, "Were you a Christian?" "Yes." Although, there's a separate discussion about whether or not who's a true Christian, who's not, but I'm not going through that for the last question. I don't know what we're going to disagree on most because I haven't followed him in great detail. As soon as I announced we were doing the event, people started sending me, "Oh, he said this, oh, he said this," and I was like, really? Evidently, he said that Hurricane Katrina was the judgment of an Old Testament God. And that puts him on par with Pat Robertson, except that I have a suspicion that he's being metaphorical in his things. So we'll find out. But I do hope that it'll be an interesting, productive conversation, that the people who show up will get something out of it. And I'm going to at least try to pin him down on God and especially morality, because he seems to think that you can't have any sort of moral system absent God. And if there's any one thing that I've talked about and educated people about the most over the last 13, 14 years, is that yes, you can, and it's better. But thanks so much for coming out. I appreciate it. And that's it. I'll be up by Emerson to say hi and shake hands and whatever.